So you are currently carrying around a device in your pocket that gives you like immediate access to the entirety of human knowledge.
Right.
And yet, if you are, like most people, navigating the modern world right now, your baseline cognitive state is probably just this sort of low-grade simmering panic.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
mean, you wake up,
Absolutely.
right, and the screen lights up with, I don't know, 30 notifications.
Yeah.
The inbox is already overflowing with these totally manufactured emergencies, and the algorithm is just feeding you this highly curated stream of geopolitical anxiety.
Just right into your brain.
Right, and your nervous system is essentially redlining before you've even, like, made it to the kitchen to brew your morning coffee.
It's exhausting. We exist in this hyper-stimulated, chronically hijacked state.
We really do. And we've somehow just normalized the feeling of our attention being constantly fractured. So today, our mission on this deep dive is to deconstruct a piece of source material that offers a remarkably, mechanical, non-mystical framework for taking that attention back.
Which is so needed right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We are looking at the fourth installment of the series called The Inner Horizon, The Art of Being Present. And specifically, we're unpacking this whole concept of mindfulness.
Right.
But we are doing this by completely discarding the usual cultural baggage,
Yeah.
like the incense, the expensive retreats, the toxic positivity.
Oh, marketing fluff.
Yes, all of it. We're throwing that out and examining it strictly as an applied cognitive tool. And we're being guided by the insights of a meditation researcher who is featured heavily in the text.
And, I think it is a completely necessary framing, primarily because the term itself has just been so degraded into this corporate wellness buzzword.
Oh, for sure.
It's often pitched as this quick fix productivity hack, like do this so you can return to your spreadsheets with slightly lower blood pressure.
Right, like a coffee break, but for your brain.
Exactly. And the text we are analyzing today fundamentally rejects that premise, like right out of the gate.
I noticed that.
It dismantles the most pervasive myths surrounding the whole practice, which is this idea that mindfulness is the active suppression of thought.
Which is what everyone thinks it is.
Right.
Yeah.
It explicitly states that this is not about emptying your mind or, achieving some sort of lobotomized blank slate serenity.
It's not about turning your brain off.
No, not at all. It is absolutely not a mechanism for escaping reality. Rather, the source defines it as the practice of arriving fully in the here and now and noticing life as it unfolds.
Okay, let's unpack this,
Yeah.
because right there, the text introduces what I think is a massive friction point.
Okay, how so?
Well, if the objective is definitively not to escape reality, but to arrive fully within it, that seems completely counterintuitive to how human beings handle distress.
Right.
Because when your reality is objectively awful-like, say you are staring down a terrifying medical diagnosis, or you are drowning in debt, or you're managing this toxic family dynamic, arriving quote-unquote fully in that agonizing reality sounds like a recipe for a psychological collapse.
I see what you mean. It sounds overwhelming.
Exactly. Dissociation, distraction, numbing out. I mean, these are evolutionarily conserved defense mechanisms for a reason, right?
Yeah, they protect us.
They protect the organism from being completely overwhelmed. So if we are tossing at escapism, how does leaning into acute discomfort actually provide any mechanical advantage to you, the listener, who might be dealing with a deeply stressful reality today?
That tension you are identifying is the exact paradox the text addresses.
Okay.
Because the urge to compartmentalize or to dissociate from a painful reality is a completely rational, biologically driven defense mechanism.
Right.
If you touch a boiling kettle, the nociceptors in your hand trigger an immediate withdrawal reflex. You pull away.
Instantly.
Right. And the psychological equivalent of that hot kettle is like financial ruin or a severe health crisis. The reflex is to pull away, to numb the pain through doom scrolling, substance use, or just, chronic busyness.
So staying distracted constantly.
Exactly. But the argument presented in the source material is that psychological avoidance incurs a devastating metabolic cost.
What do you mean by metabolic cost?
Well, when you avoid a stressor, it doesn't just disappear. It goes subclinical. It becomes this background process that is constantly draining your cognitive battery.
Oh, like leaving an app running on your phone.
Exactly like that.
Mm-hmm.
You now have the primary stressor, plus the massive daily energy expenditure required to repress it outrun it, or deny its existence.
Wow.
This is what researchers call allostatic load, and the text posits that finding peace in presence, that's a quote, is a byproduct of observation, not resistance.
Okay.
Because observation removes that secondary friction. You are no longer burning energy trying to pretend the fire doesn't exist. You are simply acknowledging the temperature of the room.
Right, but I want to push back on the mechanics of that, though.
Yeah.
Because just acknowledging the temperature of the room sounds incredibly passive.
Like, if my house is literally on fire, passively observing the flames while the roof collapses doesn't seem like peace to me. It seems like giving up.
Right.
So where is the line between observing reality and simply surrendering to a bad situation?
That's a great distinction. Observation in this context is not synonymous with capitulation.
Okay.
It is actually the prerequisite for effective action. The text makes a crucial distinction here between the external circumstance and your internal cognitive overlay.
Cognitive overlay.
Yeah. Let's use your burning house analogy. The objective reality is simply the house is on fire.
Right. Bad situation.
Right. But the cognitive overlay, the resistance, is the internal monologue screaming, this shouldn't be happening. It's not fair. I'm ruined. Why didn't I check the wiring?
Which is what everyone does.
Exactly. But that internal monologue does absolutely nothing to extinguish the flames. And worse, it absolutely paralyzes your executive function, preventing you from calmly finding the exit.
Oh, I see. By dropping the resistance and just observing the reality, you free up the cognitive bandwidth required to actually dial emergency services and evacuate. You step out of the wrestling match with the concept of the fire, and you deal directly with the reality of it.
That makes the transition to the source text primary metaphor incredibly clear. Because to explain that shift from, a panic narrative to objective observation, the text utilizes this surprisingly mechanical analogy.
Yes, the radio.
Exactly. It frames human consciousness through the lens of a radio dial. And the quote is, think of mindfulness like tuning a radio. When the dial is off, you hear static. But when you tune it just right, the music comes through clearly.
Yeah.
It notes that mindfulness is the tuning process that helps us hear life without the noise of distraction.
What's fascinating here is how effectively that bypasses the mystical language usually associated with this topic.
Right. No chakras, no third eye. Just a radio.
Just a radio, because a radio is simply a receiver of frequencies, and your brain is also a receiver, constantly processing exteroceptive data from the environment and interoceptive data from your body.
Right.
The text argues that the music, the clear signal, is the objective present moment. It is the actual unadulterated sensory data of right now.
Like the temperature.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
temperature of the air on your skin, the ambient sound of traffic outside, the physical pressure of the chair you are sitting in.
Right.
That signal is continuous. It is always broadcasting. The interference, the static, is our own neurological architecture working against us.
So let's define that static, because I think the text leaves a little room for interpretation there. For the listener, the static isn't just generic distraction.
No, it's very specific.
It's the brain's predictive coding engine, running completely unregulated.
Yeah.
It is your mind running a highly detailed, catastrophic simulation of a performance review you have scheduled for next Thursday.
Oh, absolutely.
Or it's the playback of a deeply embarrassing conversation you had in an elevator, like 3 years ago.
We all have those.
We do. The static is the brain's obsessive time traveling. It is a layering of past regret and future anxiety so loud that it completely jams the signal of the present moment.
Exactly.
You can be sitting in a perfectly safe, quiet room drinking a great cup of coffee, but your internal receiver is tuned to the frequency of a hypothetical disaster.
Which triggers a very real physiological cascade. That is the actual danger of the static.
Yeah.
Your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, is notoriously bad at distinguishing between a vivid mental simulation of a threat and an actual physical threat in the room.
Wow, really? So it can't tell the difference.
Not at all. If your mental radio is blasting the static of a simulated financial collapse, your adrenal glands will pump cortisol into your bloodstream as if you are currently being chased by a predator.
That is wild.
Your heart rate variability plummets, your digestion halts, you are mounting a massive biological defense against a ghost. You are reacting to a broadcast that has no physical reality.
So the tuning mechanism isn't just a mental trick then. It is an active intervention in your own neurochemistry.
Exactly.
So how do we actually turn the dial? The text provides the baseline physical practice for this, and frankly, it sounds almost insultingly basic at first glance.
It really does.
It's a take a breath, Notice the air entering your lungs, the rise and fall of your chest. That's mindfulness. And I'm reading that thinking, if I'm trapped in a highly evolved, cortisol-soaked simulation of my own professional failure, noticing my chest rise feels like throwing a pebble at a tank.
Right. It sounds basic only if we ignore the neurobiology of what is actually happening during that intentional breath.
Okay, lay it on me.
The text isn't suggesting the breath because oxygen possesses magical properties. It directs you to the breath because the physical sensation of breathing operates exclusively in the present tense.
Oh.
You cannot inhale yesterday and you cannot exhale tomorrow. The breath is an anchor tethered explicitly to objective reality.
That makes so much sense.
Right. So when you actively shift your attentional spotlight from the cognitive simulation of the future to the physical sensation of the air moving through your nasal passages, you are forcing a network switch in the brain.
Like flipping a breaker.
Exactly. You are powering down the default mode network, which handles all that time-traveling rumination and self-referential thought, and you're activating the task positive network, which handles present-moment sensory processing.
So I am seeing a parallel here with an emergency brake. The breath isn't solving the problem of the future performance review, but it is severing the physiological feedback loop.
That's a perfect way to put it.
By deliberately tracking the physical movement of the diaphragm, you are essentially manually overriding the autonomic nervous system. You are sending a bottom-up signal via the vagus nerve that says, hey, the organism is currently stationary and respiration is controlled. Ergo, we are not being eaten. Stand down.
Precisely. It is a bottom-up regulation strategy. Because the cognitive static is a top-down phenomenon, your thoughts are creating a physical reaction. The mindful breath reverses the flow of traffic.
You use a deliberate physical action to enforce a cognitive reset.
Yes. The text isolates the breath because it is the only autonomous system in the human body that can be consciously controlled. You cannot voluntarily lower your blood pressure just by thinking about it.
Right.
You cannot command your digestion to speed up, but you can choose to alter your respiration, which then acts as a lever to manipulate those other autonomic functions.
Which moves us beautifully into the next major transition in the source material.
Mm-hmm.
We shift from the poetry of the radio analogy into rigorous clinical operationalization.
Yes, the interview section.
Right. The text features an interview with a researcher and meditation teacher. And this guest provides a highly specific 4-pillar definition of what we are actually doing when we attempt this.
That's a great definition.
It is. The guest defines mindfulness as paying attention on purpose to the present moment without judgment.
It is a dense, highly loaded sentence that requires careful deconstruction. The first two components, paying attention on purpose, establish the premise that our default mode of existence is paying attention entirely by accident.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's the attention economy doing what it was designed to do.
Exactly.
I mean, human attention is now the most commodified resource on the planet. Your attention is routinely hijacked by algorithmic design, by advertising, by the ping of a smartwatch, or even internally by a sudden spike in blood sugar or a random memory.
We're just being pulled in a million directions.
We live our entire lives as passengers in a vehicle driven by external stimuli. So to pay attention on purpose is a radical reclamation of agency. It is taking the steering wheel and declaring, I am directing the spotlight of my awareness, rather than allowing it to be dragged around by whatever stimulus screams the loudest.
And the direction you are pointing that spotlight is the third pillar, to the present moment. Again, returning to the high-fidelity signal of objective reality rather than the low-fidelity simulation of the past or future.
Right.
But the entire structural integrity of this definition rests on the fourth pillar, which is also the point of highest friction for anyone attempting to apply this clinically.
Oh, without judgment.
Yes.
This is where I struggle, and where I know anyone listening to this right now will struggle, because the text goes on to explicitly clarify this pillar, stating, it's not about controlling thoughts. It's about noticing them and letting them pass.
Right.
Let me present a highly realistic scenario.
Okay.
I sit down, I try to pay attention on purpose to my breath, and immediately my brain serves up a thought. You are an imposter, you are going to get fired, and everyone will know you are a fraud.
A classic intrusive thought.
Exactly. How do I possibly notice that thought without judging it? It is an inherently terrifying, negative, highly charged psychological attack.
Mm-hmm.
My immediate involuntary reaction is to judge that thought as bad, dangerous, and something I need to violently suppress or out-argue immediately.
Sure.
Treating that thought neutrally feels like agreeing with it.
And this is the most profound misunderstanding of cognitive diffusion. Let's look at the mechanics of control versus observation.
Okay.
When your brain generates the thought, I am a fraud, and you attempt to control it by arguing with it, by telling yourself, no, I'm not, I have a degree, I work hard, or by panicking and trying to suppress it, you have engaged with the thought.
Right.
You have validated it as a legitimate threat requiring a defense. You have just poured high-octane fuel onto a small spark.
Oh, it's exactly like an algorithm.
How so?
Think about a spam filter or a social media feed optimized for engagement. If you click on an enraging post and type out a furious reply, the algorithm doesn't log that you hated the post. It just logs.
Yeah.
High engagement. This user interacts with this type of content.
Yes.
And then it serves you 10 more posts just like it. By fighting the intrusive thought, I am signaling to my own neurological algorithm that this thought is highly salient, highly important, and requires more processing power. I'm guaranteeing that the brain will serve it up again.
That is an exceptionally accurate model of human cognition. Judgment is the metric of engagement.
Oh.
The moment you judge a thought as unacceptable or dangerous, you attach an emotional valence to it. That emotion creates neurological friction, which traps the thought in your working memory, causing it to loop.
That makes perfect sense.
The practice of being without judgment is the practice of starving the algorithm. It requires a fundamental paradigm shift, realizing that you are the observer of your thoughts, not the author of them, and certainly not the subject of them.
So if I'm not my thoughts, what are they? Just random neurological weather.
Exactly. Your brain is an organ. Just as your stomach secretes acid to digest food, your brain secretes thoughts to process data, anticipate threats, and solve problems.
Right.
Much of this process is involuntary and messy. Practicing non-judgment means treating a thought like I am a fraud the exact same way you would treat a sudden chill in the air.
Oh, I like that.
You wouldn't yell at the wind for being cold. You wouldn't try to out-argue the weather. You would simply note, a drop in temperature. When the anxious thought arises, the practice is to note, my brain is currently producing a narrative about professional failure. You decouple the data from your identity.
You remove the engagement metric, you let the spam sit in the inbox without clicking it, and eventually the system auto-deletes it.
Precisely.
The thought arises, you refuse to fight it or endorse it, and lacking the friction of your judgment, it simply exhausts its own momentum and dissolves.
And this is not a theoretical abstraction. The source material intentionally anchors this definition with a clinical case study to prove its empirical efficacy.
Right, the anxiety client.
Yes. The researcher interviewed in the text details their work with a specific client suffering from severe chronic anxiety. They didn't prescribe a radical lifestyle overhaul or send her off-grid.
No mountain retreat.
Right. The intervention was remarkably minimal. Just 5 minutes of daily practice, sitting, focusing on breathing, and noticing sensations.
And the stated outcome of those 5 minutes is what makes this deep dive so critical. The text observes a distinct behavioral shift in this client. She learned to pause before reacting.
Yeah, that's the key.
On the surface, learning to pause does not sound like a medical breakthrough. It doesn't sound like it warrants a case study. But if we dig into the neuroscience of severe anxiety, creating a pause is akin to splitting the atom.
It really is.
It is the insertion of free will into an otherwise automated biological loop.
Let's map the anatomy of a reaction to understand why that pause is so revolutionary. In a highly anxious individual, the gap between a stimulus and a response is virtually zero.
Right.
Let's say the stimulus is an ambiguous text message from a partner saying, we need to talk later. The instant the eyes scan those words, the amygdala fires, bypassing the prefrontal cortex, the logical regulatory center of the brain.
Instant panic.
The body is flooded with adrenaline. And within milliseconds, the individual fires back a defensive, accusatory text or spirals into a full-blown panic attack. The stimulus and the reaction are fused. They are practically the same event.
You are living life as a human pinball, just bouncing violently off every bumper you hit. There is no agency, only velocity.
Precisely. Now, examine what those 5 minutes of daily mindfulness practice were physically doing to this client's brain. During those 5 minutes, her mind would wander to an anxious thought, she would notice the distraction without judgment, and she would redirect her attention to her breath.
Rep after rep.
Every time she executed that sequence, she was firing and wiring a specific neural pathway. She was strengthening the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. She was physically thickening the myelin sheath on the neural circuits responsible for top-down emotional regulation.
She was building a neurological brake pedal. So the pause isn't just a psychological trick. It's a reinforced physical structure in her brain.
Hmm.
When she receives that ambiguous text message now, the amygdala still fires. She still feels the initial spike of fear, the hot kettle.
Right.
But because of the daily reps, the prefrontal cortex comes online faster. It inserts a 500 millisecond gap.
Hmm.
And in that tiny half-second pause, the stimulus and the reaction decouple. She notices the spike in heart rate. She observes the thought, they are going to leave me.
Hmm.
And in that space, she reclaims her agency.
Exactly.
She can choose to take a breath, set the phone down, and reply later when the physiological spike has passed.
This raises an important question about the long-term results, which the text explicitly addresses. The text notes that over time, the client's anxiety lessened and she felt more grounded.
Right.
But notice what it does not say. It does not say she stopped receiving ambiguous text messages. It does not say her external environment became perfectly curated and conflict-free.
Our world is still the world.
Exactly. Small, consistent inputs, just 5 minutes of attentional training a day, yielded a non-linear, outsized psychological output. She fundamentally altered her reaction time, which insulated her from the chaos of the environment.
And that clinical result sets up what I consider to be the most liberating paradigm shift in the entire source document.
Hmm.
This changes the entire objective of stress management for you, the listener. The text states, mindfulness isn't about eliminating stress, it's about changing our relationship to it.
Yes. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a direct indictment of the modern wellness industry, which largely operates on the premise that stress is an operational failure.
Oh, completely.
We are sold the illusion that if we optimize our sleep hygiene and drink the right adaptogen and arrange our calendars perfectly, we can construct an impermeable fortress against stress. It treats stress as an infection that must be eradicated.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The text bluntly shatters that illusion. The featured guest points out a simple, undeniable fact.
Stress will always exist.
You are going to get sick. The market is going to crash. People you deeply care about are going to disappoint you. The plumbing in your house is going to fail. If your baseline metric for success in life is the absence of stress, you are guaranteeing a lifetime of failure.
Because you can't control everything.
Right. You will spend your entire life being incredibly stressed out about the fact that you are experiencing stress.
It is a devastating feedback loop. When the goal is elimination, every stressor is interpreted as an existential threat to your well-being. A flat tire isn't just a flat tire, it is a violation of the stress-free reality you feel entitled to.
Wow. That hits hard.
This hostility towards stress amplifies the physiological response. The text proposes an alternative objective to respond to inevitable stress with clarity instead of panic.
Let's contrast those two operational states because they dictate entirely different life trajectories. Panic is the ultimate reduction of bandwidth. When you are in a state of panic over that flat tire, your vision literally narrows. Evolutionarily, you only need to see the tiger in front of you. You don't need peripheral vision.
Right.
Your creative problem-solving centers shut down. Empathy evaporates. You make impulsive, highly reactive decisions driven entirely by the mandate to escape the discomfort immediately. Panic takes a manageable problem and weaponizes it.
Clarity, conversely, is the byproduct of the mindful pause we discussed earlier. Clarity does not mean you are immune to the inconvenience. It doesn't mean you sit on the side of the highway feeling profound joy about the flat tire.
That would be weird.
Very weird. Clarity is simply the accurate assessment of objective reality without the addition of catastrophic narrative. Clarity looks at the tire and says, "The structural integrity of this rubber has failed. I need to retrieve the jack from the trunk." It actively rejects the static narrative of, "This always happens to me. I'm going to be late. My boss will fire me. I am fundamentally unlucky." Clarity preserves your cognitive bandwidth so you can actually execute the solution.
So changing our relationship to stress means stopping the futile attempt to control the weather and instead focusing entirely on getting really good at building umbrellas.
That's a great metaphor.
You accept that it's going to rain, and when it does, you don't waste energy screaming at the clouds, you just deploy the umbrella.
And that transition from the philosophical to the actionable is exactly where the source material takes us next. It moves into a section focused on practical potential.
Right.
It addresses the logistical reality of the listener. If the goal is clarity, and we know we only need a few minutes of attentional training to build that neural brake pedal, how do we actually integrate this into a life that is already bursting at the seams?
This was my favorite part of the text, purely for its pragmatism. The biggest barrier to entry for cognitive training is the aesthetic that surrounds it. People think they need a perfectly silent room, a 45-minute block of uninterrupted time, and a specialized cushion.
Right, the whole setup.
For anyone with a demanding career, small children, or just a normal modern schedule, that is completely untenable. The source text dismantles that barrier by suggesting we use the mundane, repetitive tasks we are already forced to do as our training ground. It specifically highlights drinking tea, brushing your teeth, or walking.
It is a brilliant application of habit stacking. You do not need to invent new time. You simply alter the quality of awareness you bring to existing time. The text provides a precise, four-step mechanical breakdown of how to execute this micro-mindfulness.
Okay, let's go through them.
The first step is to simply slow down.
Which is harder than it sounds, because when I'm brushing my teeth, I am usually pacing around the house, checking an email with my free hand, and planning the next 3 hours of my morning.
We all do that.
My physical body is in the bathroom, but my brain is already at the office. Slowing down the physical movement of the brush is a somatic cue to the nervous system. It breaks the momentum of the rush.
That physical deceleration enables the second step, paying attention to sensations, sounds, and movements. This is the act of tuning the dial to the music.
Right.
If you are drinking tea, it is not about thinking about the tea. It is about sensory immersion, feeling the specific topography of the ceramic mug, tracking the exact temperature of the liquid as it hits your palate, noticing the auditory sound of the swallow.
Just raw data.
Yes, you are flooding the task-positive network with high-resolution sensory data from the present moment.
And then, inevitably, we hit step 3. The text instructs us to notice distractions.
Notice how it says notice.
Right. Notice that it explicitly does not say prevent distractions. Because within 10 seconds of focusing on the ceramic mug, your brain is going to violently yank you back to the static.
Of course it will.
You will suddenly remember an unpaid utility bill. The instruction is to simply notice that the hijacking has occurred.
I am no longer tasting the tea. I am worrying about the electricity bill.
Which sets up step 4. The most critical hinge point of the entire practice.
Yeah.
When your mind wanders, gently bring it back. The source text offers a profound course correction here that every listener needs to internalize. It states, mindfulness isn't about perfection. It's about practice.
Let me push back on how people actually experience this, though.
Sure.
Because when someone tries to focus on their tea and they realize they've just spent a full minute mentally drafting a hostile email, they don't feel like they are practicing. They feel like they have failed. The distraction feels like a defeat.
Right. They get frustrated.
The internal narrative becomes, I am bad at this. My brain is too broken, too chaotic to meditate. This doesn't work for me.
That interpretation is the fundamental error. The distraction is not a failure. The distraction is the exact resistance required to build the muscle.
Oh, like working out. Let's use a gym analogy. If you go to the gym to lift weights, gravity is constantly pulling the dumbbell down. You don't get angry at gravity. You don't view gravity as a failure.
That would be ridiculous.
Right. The act of pushing against gravity is the workout. In cognitive training, the mind's tendency to wander into static is gravity. The act of noticing the distraction, disengaging from it without judgment, and actively returning your focus to the sensory data of the tea. That return is the bicep curl. That is the repetition.
So if I sit down for 2 minutes and my mind wanders 40 different times, and I catch it and bring it back to the breath 40 different times, I have failed at meditating.
Not at all.
I've actually just completed 40 reps of strengthening my prefrontal cortex. I've successfully reinforced the neural pathway of the pause 40 times.
That is exactly the mechanical reality, and it explains why the text places such heavy emphasis on the word gently bringing it back. If your mind wanders and you respond with frustration, I lost focus again, I'm terrible at this, you are adding judgment. You are creating friction and spiking cortisol. You are feeding the static.
Right.
Gently means executing the return with neutrality of an algorithm. Error detected. Rerouting attention to sensory input.
That reframing is entirely liberating. It changes the practice from a rigid test of focus, which we will all fail, into a game of simply catching the wander.
Exactly.
And because the metric for success is so different, the text can make a staggering claim about the required time investment. It claims that even 2 minutes of mindful presence can shift your perspective. Why is the effective dose so incredibly low? How does 120 seconds actually move the needle on chronic systemic stress?
Because you are interrupting the exponential compounding of the stress response.
Oh, yeah.
When you are caught in the static, your nervous system is in a positive feedback loop. Anxious thoughts trigger cortisol, which increases heart rate, which signals to the brain that there is danger, which generates more anxious thoughts.
It just spirals.
2 minutes of deliberate, sensory-focused mindfulness acts as a circuit breaker. It halts the loop. By anchoring to the present, you force the vagus nerve to signal safety to the heart.
Even for just 2 minutes.
Even a 2-minute cessation of the stress cascade allows the autonomic nervous system to reset its baseline. You are not solving the external problems of your life in those 2 minutes, but you are resetting the instrument you use to navigate them. You are restoring clarity.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you step back into the chaos of your day? Let's synthesize the journey we've taken through the Inner Horizon text.
Yeah.
We began by destroying the myth that you need to empty your mind or retreat from the world.
Right.
Mindfulness is the deeply practical, sometimes uncomfortable act of arriving exactly where you are, to avoid the massive energy drain of psychological resistance. We learned that the noise in our heads, the static, is just low-fidelity simulation, and we have the physical power to tune the dial back to the high-fidelity music of reality using the anchor of our breath.
It's a very mechanical process.
We learned the mechanics of cognitive diffusion, treating our terrifying thoughts like spam emails that lose their power when we refuse to engage or judge them. We saw how just 5 minutes of this practice physically rewires the brain, inserting a pause between a trigger and a reaction, effectively giving us our free will back.
Which is huge.
We shattered the illusion of a stress-free life, trading the impossible goal of eliminating stress for the highly attainable goal of meeting it with clarity. And finally, we realized that the training ground for this isn't a mountaintop. It's the 2 minutes you spend drinking your tea or brushing your teeth, where every distraction is just another opportunity to build the muscle of attention.
That's a perfect summary.
The text summarizes the entire endeavor beautifully. Mindfulness is the art of being here, the doorway to peace, and the foundation for healing. You don't need hours, you just need moments of awareness.
And cultivating those moments of awareness is the absolute prerequisite for the broader optimization of a human life. It is highly intentional how the source material closes out this segment.
Yeah, it sets up the next topic.
It looks ahead, teasing the focus of their next installment with the line, "Next time, we'll explore gratitude, the practice of seeing abundance even in small things." There's a sequential, mechanical logic to that progression.
How so?
Gratitude is functionally impossible without mindfulness. You cannot perceive abundance in the small details of your environment if your attentional bandwidth is entirely consumed by the simulation of the past and the future.
Right.
Gratitude requires high-resolution data processing. Mindfulness is the mechanism that clears the static so you can actually receive the data of the good things happening around you.
It's like having a winning lottery ticket in your pocket, but you're too busy staring at a spot on the wall to ever reach in and check the numbers. You have to be present enough to realize what you are holding. That is the utility of this practice. It puts you back in the room where your life is actually happening.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, taking the text's primary metaphor one step further. If mindfulness is the act of consciously tuning your mental radio to clear away the catastrophic static of the default mode network, and gratitude is the music of abundance broadcasting on that newly cleared channel, what station are you going to actively choose to tune into tomorrow morning when you pick up your toothbrush? Thanks for letting us be your guides on this deep dive. Stay curious, protect your attention, and we'll catch you on the next one.